Hey everyone, before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that it's been a very heartbreaking week in the United States due to systemic racism and police brutality. For those of you who are able, I encourage you to vote, contact your representatives, donate, and protest. Thank you so much. Hello everyone, my name is Morgan and welcome to my soapbox where I talk about things that interest me and sometimes infuriate me. Just before I get into this, I apologize. There's a chirping bird in the background. So if you do hear a chirp, you're not going insane. Today I want to give my belated 2 cents on the Stauffer family rehoming their autistic son that they originally adopted from China. For those of you who don't know, Myka and Jim Stauffer are family vloggers. They have 4 biological children and they also had a son adopted from China. They have given this adopted child to another family, citing medical issues and possibly safety concerns. I think this case brings a lot of issues that come with international adoptions and families sharing their lives on social media. Today, I'm just going to be talking about the issues this case raises about international adoption. On the surface level, international adoption seems like a good thing to do, but actually it's a very problematic industry. Countries like China do participate in the Hague Convention, which is an international agreement between countries concerning trans-country adoption. It's important to know that not all countries open to international adoption participate in the Hague Convention, and even those who do, there is a risk for child exploitation. More people want to adopt orphans than there are actual orphans, especially parents who are looking for a healthy baby. Since international adoption is a very profitable industry, people are seeking to fill this gap with kids that have living, loving parents. Some parents give their kids up due to poverty. It's important to note that not every parent who places their child in an orphanage intends for this to be permanent. Orphanages abroad kind of act like the foster care system in the United States, where it's just temporary until parents get back on their feet. So sometimes when parents are able to care for the child again and they go to the orphanage, their child is gone and they can't find them. Other time, birth parents are painted a very different picture of adoption than what it actually is. They believe that they will remain in contact with their children and their children will eventually be returned to them. And in some cases, especially with infants and toddlers, children are straight up abducted. This problem can crassly be described as a supply and demand problem, and I think it's due to people's motivations concerning international adoption. Many Christian evangelicals see adoption as an appropriate response to God's call to care for the orphans. They have these visions of swooping in and saving these children from destitution and eternal damnation. Completely overlooking the potential trauma this can cause a child, especially if the adoptive parents are incompetent. There have been numerous cases of international adoptees being brought into the U.S. by parents who are doing the Lord's work, only to be neglected, abused, and or adopted again because their new families couldn't meet their needs or mold them into subservient little disciples. Some of these children have been killed. Looking at the Stauffers' old videos, it doesn't appear that they really follow this fundamentalist, extreme evangelical Christianity that has been linked to child abuse and adoptee deaths. However, I do feel like they were motivated partly to adopt a child with special needs from a different country so they could serve the Lord. And of course, get brownie points from other Christian families and the public in general on social media. As a Christian who's read a fair amount of the Bible, I do see God's call to help the orphans and the poor. However, I have yet to find a passage where God tells you to rip a child from their homeland and their living, loving parents so you can feel good about yourself. True, Moses was adopted, but he also destroyed his adopted community because they were oppressing his people. So I don't really think that's like a good example. And I bring the story of Moses up because I have come across his adopted story being used as a justification on Christian adoption blogs. And just the irony of it drives me insane. I personally believe that the most appropriate response to God's call to help others is to work with these communities for empowerment. The documentary Poverty Incorporated has a really good example of this. A Christian family moved to Haiti with plans of building an orphanage. And then they got there and realized the problem wasn't orphans, it was families unable to care for their children because of economic insecurity. So instead, they created the Parent Project, a business, early childhood education, and skills training program so parents can provide for their children. So in addition to the expectation that comes with international adoption, there is also problems with adoptive parents' expectations and capabilities. Some people just assume that they get to bring kids homes and everybody will be singing Kumbaya after like a brief transition period. But it's well documented that international adoptees have a lot of undisclosed medical conditions, and including attachment disorders, especially if they were raised in an institutional environment. What really struck me about the Stauffers is their claim that they didn't know how bad the child's health problems were. But Myka talked about how they were made aware of a bad prognosis and they were confident that they could handle it. And looking back now, their attitude just reeks of arrogance. So in addition to people that will be ignorant, there are fundamental Christian families that also have no business adopting. Like I touched on earlier, some fundamentalist adoptive families should not be adopting kids because they already have too many children and they follow abusive disciplining practices. Yes, these families are supposed to be vetted, but as I've mentioned earlier, the adoption industry is very lucrative and very unregulated. Adoption agencies are not required to be accredited. People that are interested in international adoption don't have to undergo extensive training like those becoming foster parents. Once a parent decides that they no longer want the child they adopted, they have several options. The state can place that child in foster care, go through an adoption agency for a second chance adoption, or they do it themselves. And that's where it gets dicey. People are supposed to go through courts and do background checks and home studies. And I do think it's important to note that the Stauffers appear to be doing this through proper channels. However, some parents want to avoid the potential legal ramifications of giving up a child, so they turn to rehoming communities. All they have to do is sign a piece of paper giving the new family power of attorney. Rehoming within a state is sketchy, but it's not technically illegal in most parts. But if you do exchange custody across state lines, you are supposed to follow the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children or the ICPC. Parents are required to notify authorities in both states so the proper vetting can occur. But in general, the ICPC really isn't enforced. Some states have no punishments and others have just misdemeanor charges. Families that don't follow the ICPC are rarely prosecuted. I think so many of us are upset with the Stauffer family because it's a blatant example of the white savior complex, deceit, and child exploitation. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident and is just an example of the bigger problems concerning family blogging and international adoptions. I really do hope this is a wake call to take a hard look at the process of international adoption and sharing their kids on social media. Thank you for sticking around to the end. If you liked it, please subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments.